In the last video, we spoke about two different ways of handling deployments of our campaigns. Solution number one put all the power of deployment onto our users. The issue with solution number one was that it introduced a big security hole, which was definitely not ideal. Solution number two solved that security hole by putting the burden of deployment on us, the people who are deploying the server and the overall application. The downside to solution number two was that it made you and I responsible for the cost of deploying campaigns, and we definitely don't want to have to pay for that. In this video, we're going to talk about a third possible solution. This is going to be a sort of hybrid approach that takes the best qualities of solution number one and solution number two and combines them together. All right, so let's take a look at this. So this time around, before we ever release our application into the wild, where people can make use of it, you and I are going to deploy a second contract. So we're going to write a second contract and we're going to deploy it before we ever release our application out to the wild. This second contract that you and I are going to make is going to be a manager of sorts. It's going to manage all the different instances of campaigns that eventually get deployed to the xbte network or whatever network we're making use of. We're going to refer to this second contract as a factory of sorts. The purpose of this factory is to create new instances of our campaign. Now that's a little bit tough to wrap your head around. And before you ask the question, I'm going to answer the question that you very likely have. Can a contract deploy another contract? The answer is yes. We can take one contract and have it deploy another. So inside of our remix editor over here, we have one contract right here. We are going to create a second contract inside of the same file. And this second contract will have one purpose. And that purpose is to create and deploy instances of the campaign. So we're going to write that contract and deploy it. Then at some time in the future, after we actually release our product to the outside world, if a user clicks on the Create Campaign button right here, we are going to tell that user's copy of Web3 and MetaMask to send a transaction to this campaign factory that you and I are going to put together. Whenever one contract deploys another, the cost of deployment is on the user who sends the transaction. So in solution number three right here, the deployment is being handled by our new factory contract, yes, but the actual payment for that is going to be on the user. So like I said, this is a type of hybrid approach where you and I are in much greater control of the code that is getting deployed. However, it is still the user who has to pay for the deployment. So the user is going to pay for that cost, and then our factory will deploy a new copy of the campaign. The campaign factory will also be used to store a list of all the different campaigns that have been deployed. So this is where we can have one central location that gives us a canonical list of addresses of all the deployed campaigns. This is a really great solution right here because not only is the campaign factory going to be in charge of deployments, but it also manages all the different instances that are out there. And when I say manage, well, it doesn't have a lot of control, but at least keeps a record of what instances of campaign have been deployed. Now this flow diagram right here is kind of not the best way of showing what's going on. So I want to talk about solution number three one more time. We're going to kind of do it again from start to finish, but this time we're going to look at a diagram that's going to make it a lot easier to understand what's going on. All right, so on the right-hand side here, we have our xbte blockchain or our xbte network. So you and I are going to write this campaign factory contract, and we are going to deploy it ourselves to the xbte network, or to whatever network we want to deploy it to. This is going to be a one-time deployment because we're going to have one factory that is going to be in charge of all of our different campaigns. The factory contract itself is going to contain all of the source code for an individual campaign. And so when I say all the source code for an individual campaign, I'm talking about this campaign contract right here. So the factory has a canonical, clean, unspoiled version of the campaign source code. So there's absolutely no chance of someone getting in here and rewriting the contract or modifying it in any way, shape, or form. Then at some point in time in the future, a user might want to create a new campaign. That user is going to send a transaction to the factory. And that transaction is going to include some amount of money to pay for the deployment. Remember, there's the gas cost in there. The factory will take that money, it will create a new instance of a campaign using the stored campaign source code that it has right here, and then it will deploy a new campaign to the Rinkeby blockchain. And remember, when it gets deployed, it will be deployed with some brand new address. The factory will then take that address, record it, and store it within the factory contract itself. So the factory always has a list of all the different campaigns that have been deployed. That means that at some point in the future, when our product, when our Kickstarter platform wants to get a list of all the different campaigns that have ever been created, we can issue a simple query to the factory, and the factory will return a list of all the different addresses that it contains. Okay, so that's a simple walkthrough of what's going to go on here. I feel like the biggest challenge here to understand is simply the fact that we can write one contract that deploys another contract. And the other thing that's probably a little bit challenging to understand is the fact that these addresses are really important to keep in some location, because eventually we're going to want to get a list of all the deployed campaigns. And so because the factory stores that list, we're always going to have one sacred location that says, hey, here's a list of all the campaigns that have ever been deployed. Now that we've got a better idea of how we're going to solve all this deployment stuff, let's continue in the next video where we're going to start working on this factory contract. So I'll see you in just a minute.